She was called the Queen of the Curve, but there was a time when nobody believed she would ever build anything at all. This is the story of a little girl from Baghdad who grew up to reshape the skylines of the world. A story of talent, yes, but more than that, the story of a woman who simply refused to give up. Zaha Muhammad Hadid was born on the 31st of October 1950 in Baghdad, Iraq. The city she was born into was nothing like the Baghdad the world would later come to know through decades of conflict and war. The Baghdad of Zaha's childhood was at the height of its modern golden age, a city of optimism, of investment, of a government that believed architecture could signal the arrival of a new progressive nation. Iraq was using its growing oil wealth to modernize its capital, and the leaders of the day invited the greatest architects in the world to come and build. Frank Lloyd Wright, Le Corbusier, Oscar Niemeyer, Walter Gropius. Their work rose from the streets of Baghdad while Zaha was still a child. She grew up surrounded by bold, ambitious modernism. Architecture for her was never abstract. It was simply the world she lived in. Her family gave her every advantage. Family gave her every advantage. Her father, Muhammad Al-Hajj Hussein Hadid, was a wealthy industrialist from Mosul and a prominent politician, a co-founder of Iraq's National Democratic Party, and briefly a minister of finance. He was a man who had studied at London School of Economics and believed passionately in progress. Her mother, Wajiha Al-Sabunji, was an artist. In the Hadid household, mathematics and creativity were never seen as opposites. Both were simply tools for understanding the world. Zaha was sent to a Catholic convent school in Baghdad, where lessons were taught in French and where Muslim, Jewish, and Christian children all sat in the same classrooms. Her secondary education took her to boarding schools in Switzerland and England. From her earliest years, she was being shaped by a world far wider than any culture or tradition. Her father made a point of taking his children to great buildings and museums wherever family traveled. Zaha was recalled. Her father made sure she went to every important building in every city they visited. He took her to learn about architecture, and she believed that was what sparked her love for buildings. But the moment that may have moved her most deeply was not in a gallery or a modern city. It was on a reed boat, traveling through the ancient marshlands of southern Iraq to visit the ruins of the Sumerian cities, settlements from one of the oldest civilizations on earth. Something about those ancient forms, those landscapes built from earth itself, lodged permanently in her imagination. Her mother, Wajiha, was an artist, and the drawing ability that would later leave clients and critics speechless was first nurtured at home, absorbed from watching her mother work, growing up with both a politician and an artist as parents. Zaha understood instinctively that science and creativity were not separate worlds. They were the same world, seen from different angles. There was never any doubt in her family that she would pursue a serious professional life. As she herself once put it, there was never a question that she would be a professional. In the early 1970s, Zaha enrolled at American University of Beirut in Lebanon, where she studied mathematics. That choice, mathematics, of all things, tells you something important about her. Beneath every soaring, graffiti divine form she would later create, there was always a mind trained to find structure within complexity, to hold abstraction and precision in the same hand. In 1972, she made a decision that would define her entire life. She moved to London and entered the Architectural Association, the AA, one of the most progressive and experimental design schools in the world. In the radical intellectual atmosphere of 1970s, London, the AA was the AA was the place where architectural convention went to be challenged. And there, Zaha Hadid found her people, or perhaps, more accurately, discovered that she existed on a plane entirely her own. She studied alongside and under some of the most brilliant architectural minds of the generation. Rem Koolhaas, the radical Dutch theorist who was rewriting what architecture could mean. Elias Zangelis, the Greek-British architect who co-founded OMA. Bernard Tushmi, the Swiss theorist who believed buildings were inseparable from the events that happened inside them. These were the minds that surrounded her, challenged her, and ultimately recognized her as something exceptional. Elias Zangelis, who taught her, described Zaha as one of the most outstanding pupils he had ever encountered. He said the students used to call her the inventor of the 89 degree because nothing in her work was ever at 19 degrees. She had, he said, a spectacular vision. All her buildings were exploding into tiny little pieces. An artist who believed that pure geometry form, stripped of all reference to the real world, could express something true and essential about human experience. Inspired by Malevich, Zaha designed a 14-level hotel for London's Hungerford Bridge. She did not present it as a conventional architectural drawing. She presented it as a series of acrylic paintings, bold, fragmented, almost violent in their energy. The project was called Malavich Tectonic. It was celebrated then, and it is still studied in architecture schools today. Rem Koolhaas evaluated her work at 50th year graduation and wrote something that has since become one of the most famous assessments in architectural history. He wrote, Zaha's performance was like a rocket that took off slowly to describe a constantly accelerating trajectory. Now, she is a planet in her own imitable orbit. He added, due to the flamboyance and intensity of her work, it will be impossible for her to have a conventional career. He was absolutely right. In 1977, Zaha Hadid in 1977, Zaha Hadid graduated from the AA with the Diploma Prize, the highest distinction. Her work has been described as very anti-design, almost a movement of anti-architecture. She had arrived. After graduating, Zaha joined her former professors, Koolhaas and Zengelis, at the Office of Metropolitan Architecture, OMA, in Rotterdam. It was one of the most intellectually electric architectural practices on earth at the time, and for any young graduate, the invitation to join would have been extraordinary. But Zaha did not accept on any terms except her own. In her words, she told them she would only join as a partner. She had finished school, and they said, as long as you are an obedient partner. She said no, she was not going to be an obedient partner. She had a spine, she knew her worth, and she was unwilling to subordinate her vision to anyone else's comfort. Not even at the very start of her career, before she had built a single. Her time at OMA was brief, but she learned, she made critical connections, and she left with confidence and the tools to forge her own path. One of those connections was with the structural engineer, Peter Rice, who believed in her early on and gave her crucial encouragement during the uncertain years ahead. By 1980, she was ready. Zaha Hadid Architect was born in London. The early years of her practice were defined by paradox that would test lesser spirits entirely, extraordinary creative output, and almost total inability to get anything built. In 1983, she won her first major international competition. The brief was for a sports and leisure club in Hong Kong, set into the hillside at the peak. Her entry was unlike anything the architectural world had ever seen. She conceived an almost exploding crystalline structure set along a diagonal across the steep sides, a building that seemed to achieve fragmentation, instability, and movement simultaneously. It did not appear to rest on the ground. It appeared to erupt from it. The peak was never built, but it was widely published and celebrated, and it established Zaha's name in the only circles that mattered to her at the time, the architectural and academic worlds. The problem was that recognition in those circles did not pay walls and roofs. For nearly 10 years after the peak, Zaha entered competition after competition, won several, and saw none of them built. People began to call her a paper architect, a designer whose work would always remain beautiful, painted fantasy, and never become real buildings. Her designs were dismissed as too complex, too costly, too radical, too surreal. Many genuinely believed she would never build. In 1988, she received a notable boost when Philip Johnson and Mark Wigley selected her as one of just 7 architects to participate in the landmark Deconstructivist Architecture exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It was prestigious. It built her reputation further, but still no buildings. Then came Cardiff. In 1994, Zaha won the international competition for the Cardiff Bay Opera House in Wales. She won it in the first round. She was then asked to recompete. She won again. She was asked to recompete a third time. She won again. And then the project was refused lottery funding and killed entirely. She would later say she believed the repeated rerunning of a competition she had already won was driven, at least in part, by resistance to who she was. A woman of Arab origin operating in a country that had not yet learned to see her clearly. It was, by most accounts, one of the lowest moments of her professional life. She admitted it made her consider briefly whether she should walk away from architecture altogether. She did not walk away. I don't like the word compromise, she once said, and she meant it. That moment, everything changed. Everything began not with a design competition, but with a bolt of lightning. On the 18th of July 1981, lightning struck the production facilities of Vitra, the prestigious Swiss furniture manufacturer, at their campus in Welle am Rhein, Germany. The damage was severe. The campus had no adequate fire suppression infrastructure. In the aftermath, Vitra's director commissioned a series of new buildings from the greatest architects in the world: Frank Gehry, Tadao Ando, Alvaro Siza, Nicholas Grimshaw. Their buildings rose on the campus, one by one, creating what would become one of the world's most remarkable collections of contemporary architecture on a single site. And among the commission was one for a fire station, a functional facility to help prevent future disasters. That commission went to Zaha Hadid. She did not approach it as a functional brief. She approached it as a philosophical question. What does a fire station feel like from the inside? What psychological state does it demand of the people who work within it? The answer, she concluded, was constant alertness, the permanent readiness to move at a second notice, the tension of a spring that has not yet been released. She described her resulting designs with three words: movement, frozen. The building was cast in bare, in situ concrete, no cladding, no ornamentation, no materials applied to the surface. On the outside, the walls were imposing and linear. On the inside, they were punctured, tilted, and folded to generate the different spaces and sequences within. Zaha believed that any decoration would distract Zaha believed that any decoration would distract from the volumes, from the dynamic masses, from what she called the visual purity of the elements. The result was a sculptural building, a concretized version of her paintings. The abstraction that she had spent a decade creating on canvas, which many had dismissed as surreal and unbuildable, had been made real in concrete. When it was completed in 1993, the Vitra Fire Station sent shock waves through the architecture world. The criticism came quickly too. Reports emerged after the station opened that firefighters found the building difficult to work within. The fire brigade was eventually disbanded. The facility was felt to be too small to service the full campus effectively, and the building was converted into an exhibition and design museum. Critics argued that Zaha had prioritized form over function, that her building catered to aesthetics at the expense of practicality. This was a criticism that would follow her work for the rest of her career, and it was never without some merit, and never the whole truth either. What mattered most in 1993 was this: Zaha Hadid was no longer a paper architect, she was a builder, and the floodgates had opened. After Vitra, the commissions began to arrive: the IBA housing project in Berlin, the Mind Zone at the Millennium Dome in London, exhibition spaces in Germany. Each project was larger in scale, each one maintaining her conceptual roots, while testing her new materials and new structural logics. And the firm was growing. Patrick Shoemaker had joined ZHA back in 1988, having seen Zaha speak at a conference and being immediately captured by her ambitions. In the earliest days of ZHA, the office was filled largely by Zaha's students. When Patrick arrived, there were only 4 or 5 people. By the end of the century, there were around 40. ZHA was among the very first architectural practices to embrace digital tools and parametric design. But crucially, even as computational technology advanced, Zaha never abandoned the hand. She continued to sketch and paint at the she continued to sketch and paint at the beginning of every project. Every member of the firm was expected to do the same. The sketch was not a preliminary step towards a computer model. The sketch was where thinking happened. Amateur projects are extraordinary in their ambition and variety. The Fano Science Center in Wolfsburg, Germany, where the entire building is lifted off the ground on 10 massive concrete cones, and where new structural software had been invented alongside the design itself because existing engineering mathematics could not solve the problem. The Guangzhou Opera House in China, twin auditoriums inspired by pebbles, smoothed by erosion, sitting on the Pearl River in glass and granite. The London Aquatic Centre, built for the 2012 Olympic Games with a great undiluting wave-like roof. The Maxi Museum in Rome, the first national museum of contemporary art in Italy, with interlocking concrete shell that took a decade to complete. And then the Heydar Aliyev Center in Baku, Azerbaijan, built in 2012. It is widely regarded as her masterpiece. It is one of the most extraordinary buildings of the 21st century. From the year 2000 onwards, Zaha had reached a new peak altogether, project after project. Zaha was winning competition and winning hearts. And then came the moment that confirmed for the whole world what the architectural profession known for years. In 2004, Zaha Hadid was awarded the Pritzker Architecture Prize, the Nobel Prize of Architecture, the supreme accolade of the built world. She was the first woman ever to receive it. The jury declared that only one rarely does an architecture emerge with a philosophy and approach that influences the direction of the entire field. Such an architect, they say, is Zaha Hadid, who had patiently created and refined a vocabulary that sets new boundaries for the art of architecture. The prize was turning point. The prize was a turning point in every sense. It gave her access to larger budgets, bolder briefs, and more ambitious clients. Her firm grew from 40 people in the early 2000s to more than 450 by 2008. Projects of extraordinary skill and ambition arrived from across the world. She won the Sterling Prize, the UK's highest architectural honor, in both 2010 and 2011 in consecutive years. Time magazine named her the world's top thinker of 2010. In 2012, Queen Elizabeth II made her a Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire. She was now officially Dame Zaha Hadid. In February 2016, just weeks before her death, she became the first woman individually awarded the Royal Gold Medal from the Royal Institute of British Architects, the UK's highest architectural honor in a lifetime of achievement. The citation described her, with characteristic British understatement, as scary and extraordinary in equal measure. Architecture is a male dominated industry. This is changing, but historically it has only been men whose contributions have been deemed worthy of acknowledging. Zaha broke glass ceiling as she went, one after another, and she did it while maintaining that her work should speak entirely for itself. When asked whether her architecture was different because of her gender, she replied, I don't think so. And on the question of being a woman in architecture, she was characteristically clear. I never used the issue of being a woman architect, but it helps younger people to know that they can break through the glass ceiling. I don't mind that. She admitted she never felt entirely part of that establishment. As a woman in architecture, she once said, "You are always an outsider. It's okay. I like being on the edge." Rem Koolhaas framed her achievement most precisely of all. He said she was obviously very proud of what she had achieved as a woman, but in the end, there was no need for speed. But in the end, there was no need for special pleading or treating her architecture on that basis. Her greatest contribution, he said, was simply as an architect. No career of this magnitude exists without controversy. Zaha was no exception. The question of form versus function flowed her work throughout her life. Were her buildings genuinely livable? Were they designed for the people who would use them or for the people who would photograph them? It is a debate she engaged with seriously, and one that does not have a simple answer. The Vitra Fire Station conversation. The Vitra Fire Station conversion to a museum is cited by critics. But the Heydar Aliyev Center, the Magzi, the aquatic centers, these are buildings in full daily public use and they work. The Cardiff situation remained an open wound for years. She believed that the outcome had been shaped by bias. Many people agreed with her. The Qatar controversy was the most publicized flashpoint of her late career. When The Guardian asked her about the deaths of migrant workers in Qatar, where ZHA was designing the Al Wakra Stadium for the 2022 World Cup, she said, "I have nothing to do with the workers. It is not my duty as an architect to look at it." The response drew fierce criticism. It is worth noting that BBC Radio 4 later falsely implied that workers had died on the specific Al Wakra site. They had not. The BBC issued a formal public apology to Hadid, but the wider ethical question of what responsibility an architect carries when working in states with poor labor conditions, that question remains, and it is a legitimate one. The Tokyo Olympic Stadium was perhaps the most straightforward injustice. ZHA won the international competition for the 2020 Olympic main stadium. They worked on the design for nearly 3 years. The Japanese government then cancelled the commission and replaced it with a design by a Japanese architect. Zaha was unequivocal. She believed the decision was driven by nationalism, not merit. She kept working through all of it. She used to say, "I don't have any frustrations. If you want an easy life, don't be an architect. If you want a 9 to 5 job and to go home and relax, just don't do it." And she kept at it right until the end. On the 31st of March 2016, Zaha Hadid died in a hospital in Miami, Florida. She had been admitted for the treatment of bronchitis. She suffered a cardiac arrest. The doctors could not save her. She was 65 years old. She was buried in Brookwood Cemetery in Surrey, England, between her father Muhammad Hadid and her brother Fulat. She left an estate of £67 million. Her international designs, her international design businesses, the bulk of her wealth, were left in trust, ensuring the work would continue. After she passed, Patrick Shoemaker stepped into her shoes and steered ZHA forward. The projects she had personally been involved in were completed. The Antwerp Port House, the King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center in Saudi Arabia, the Al Jonab Stadium in Qatar. The firm continued to grow. Today, ZHA employs over 400 people and has delivered or has active projects across 44 countries. The Zaha Hadid Foundation, established during her lifetime and fully operational from 2022, holds more than 15,000 works. Drawings, paintings, models, archival materials. It is the only architectural foundation in the world dedicated to a solo woman of color. Remco has described her in the end as someone with a rare kind of courage, not constructed courage, he said, an inevitable courage. She was simply made that way. And at her graduation, all those decades before, he had already seen it coming. He had called her a planet in her own immutable orbit. He was right. Some orbits are so singular, so powerful in their pull, that even after they stop moving, the world continues to feel their gravity. That is Zaha Hadid's legacy. Not only the buildings, though the buildings are extraordinary. Her legacy is every student she ever taught, every designer she ever pushed further than they thought they could go, every person she ever inspired, and every woman for whom she kicked a door open that had been locked for generations. Whether you love her work or question it, and her belief in her own ideas, unshakable, undimmed, uncompromising, brought her to being one of the most celebrated architects the world has ever known. If you enjoyed this story, kindly like, drop a comment, hit the subscribe button to continue to see more videos like this.